Welcome to Tech with Kaushik. This is part 4 of our complete practice question series for the AZ-900 Microsoft Azure Fundamentals exam. Choose your answer before the timer ends. Then review the correct answer, detailed explanation, and exam tip. Let us begin part 4. Question number 110. Brings in a useful concept. The topic for this question is resource hierarchy. The key situation is this. Your organization wants to separate resources for 3 departments and delegate administration at an Azure scope. Some departments might also require subscriptions with separate billing arrangements. Which 2 Azure scopes can directly contain and organize the department's Azure resources? Select exactly 2 answers. Watch the differences between these options. Option A. Multiple Azure subscriptions. Option B. Multiple resource groups. Option C. Multiple Azure regions. Option D. Multiple Microsoft Entra tenants. Option E. Multiple availability zones. You should choose option A, multiple Azure subscriptions, and option B, multiple resource groups. This works because subscriptions and resource groups are Azure management scopes that can contain resources and receive scoped RBAC assignments. Subscriptions can also represent separate billing arrangements, while resource groups organize related resources within a subscription. The remaining options can be eliminated because C. Regions are deployment locations, not management containers. D. Microsoft Entra tenants are identity boundaries and do not directly contain Azure resources. E. Availability zones are isolated data center locations within a region, not management scopes. The main takeaway is the Azure hierarchy is management group, subscription, resource group, and resource, RBAC and policy can be assigned at these scopes. Let's focus on question number 111. Let's focus on the following scenario. Your company plans to migrate custom legacy applications to Azure. The applications require complex configurations and the installation of third-party prerequisite software directly on the host operating system. Which cloud service model should you recommend? Focus on what separates these choices. Now examine choice A, Infrastructure as a Service, IaaS. Now examine choice B, Platform as a Service, PaaS. Now examine choice C, Software as a Service, SaaS. Now examine choice D, Desktop as a Service, DaaS. The best choice is option A, Infrastructure as a Service, IaaS. Because the legacy applications require prerequisite software to be installed directly on the operating system, you must have administrative control over the OS. The IaaS model, using Azure Virtual Machines, is the only cloud service model that provides this level of access. Here's why the alternatives are not suitable. B. PaaS abstracts the operating system. You cannot log into a PaaS host server to install custom third-party prerequisite applications. C. SaaS delivers a finished software product. You do not host custom legacy code in a SaaS model. D. DaaS, like Azure Virtual Desktop, is focused on end-user workstations, not on hosting custom backend enterprise applications. Here's a useful exam tip. If an application cannot be modernized and requires direct OS access or legacy prerequisites, it must be migrated using an IaaS lift and shift approach. Let's work through question number 112. Here's the situation to consider. Your organization needs to discover, catalog, and classify sensitive data across Azure, on-premises systems, and other cloud environments. Which Microsoft service is designed for this data governance requirement? Now let's review the options. Option A is Microsoft Purview. Option B is Azure Service Health. Option C is Azure Backup. Option D is Azure Cloud Shell. Go with option A, Microsoft Purview. Let's look at the reasoning. Microsoft Purview provides data governance capabilities that help organizations discover, catalog, classify, and understand data across hybrid and multi-cloud environments. The other choices do not work because B, Azure Service Health reports Azure Service Incidents, planned maintenance, and health advisories. C, Azure Backup protects data and workloads through backup and recovery. D, Azure Cloud Shell is a browser-based command line environment for Azure administration. Exam tip. Choose Microsoft Purview for data discovery, classification, cataloging, and governance across an organization's data estate. Now let's examine question number 113. First, let's review the situation. Virtual machines in an Azure virtual network must access an Azure storage account by using a private IP address from the virtual network. Which Azure networking feature should you use? Here are the possible answers. Choice A, a private endpoint. Choice B, a public endpoint. Choice C, virtual network peering. Choice D, Azure Express Route. The answer here is option A, a private endpoint. The main reason is a private endpoint is a network interface that uses a private IP address from an Azure virtual network to connect privately to a supported Azure service such as Azure Storage. Let's quickly check the incorrect choices. B, a public endpoint exposes service access through a public network address. C, virtual network peering connects virtual networks to each other. It does not assign a private IP endpoint to the storage service. D, ExpressRoute provides private connectivity between on-premises networks and Microsoft Cloud services. A helpful shortcut is this. A private endpoint brings a supported Azure service into a virtual network through a private IP address. Here's an important one. Question number 114. The focus now shifts to Azure Arc. This situation sets up the main requirement. Your organization wants to use Azure management and governance capabilities for servers running in its on-premises data center and in another public cloud. Which Azure service should the organization use? Watch the differences between these options. Option A, Azure Arc. Option B, Azure Migrate. Option C, Azure Advisor. Option D, Azure Service Health. In this case, choose option A, Azure Arc. Here's why. Azure Arc extends Azure management and governance capabilities to resources running outside Azure, including on-premises data centers and other cloud environments. Now let's rule out the other options. B, Azure Migrate assesses and migrates on-premises workloads to Azure. C, Azure Advisor provides recommendations to optimize Azure resources. D, Azure Service Health reports Azure service issues and planned maintenance. Keep this point in mind for the exam. Azure Arc projects non-Azure resources into Azure Resource Manager for consistent hybrid and multi-cloud management. Let's take a look at question number 115. Take a moment to review this scenario. You are assisting a developer who uses a lightweight Chrome OS laptop. They need to run Azure CLI scripts to manage resources but cannot install local executables. What is the only local prerequisite required to access and run Azure CLI commands within Azure Cloud Shell? Take a look at each choice. Choice A, a modern web browser. Choice B, the Azure CLI executable installed locally. Choice C, a Windows or macOS operating system. Choice D, a local SSH client. The right response is option A, a modern web browser. This is the best choice because Azure Cloud Shell is an interactive, authenticated, browser-accessible shell for managing Azure resources. Because the compute environment is hosted in the cloud by Microsoft, the only local requirement is a web browser. It works seamlessly on Chrome OS, Linux, macOS, and Windows. B. Cloud Shell already has the Azure CLI pre-installed in its cloud environment, completely eliminating the need for a local installation. C. Cloud Shell is OS agnostic and works on any operating system that supports a modern browser. D. An SSH client is not required to access the Cloud Shell environment itself. Azure Cloud Shell provides a pre-configured environment with all popular Azure management tools already installed, accessible directly from the Azure portal via a browser. Take a careful look at question number 116. Pay close attention to what the scenario really requires. Your operations team must receive an email notification when an Azure Virtual Machine's CPU usage exceeds a defined threshold. Which Azure feature should the team configure? See which choices you can rule out. Next, option A, an Azure Monitor alert. Next, option B, the Azure Pricing Calculator. Next, option C, Microsoft Purview. Next, option D, a resource lock. The answer here is option A, an Azure Monitor alert. This works because Azure Monitor alerts evaluate metrics or logs against defined conditions and can use action groups to send notifications such as email, SMS, or push messages. The remaining options can be eliminated because B, the Azure Pricing Calculator estimates costs for planned deployments. C, Microsoft Purview provides data governance, discovery, and classification. D, a resource lock prevents deletion or modification of Azure resources. The main takeaway is use Azure Monitor alerts to notify or trigger actions when monitored metrics or logs meet specified conditions. Now for question number 117. Consider this situation. Your development team is writing a custom web application hosted in Azure. Before allowing access to the application, the system must verify the user's identity and issue a secure authorization token. Which Azure service acts as the identity provider to authenticate the user and issue the security token? Option A, Microsoft Entra ID. Option B, Azure Key Vault. Option C, Azure Storage. Option D, Microsoft Defender for Cloud. The best choice is option A, Microsoft Entra ID. Microsoft Entra ID, formerly Azure Active Directory, is the cloud-based identity and access management service. Applications integrate with Entra ID to authenticate users. Once authenticated, Entra ID issues security tokens, like OAuth SAML tokens, that the application uses to grant access. Here's why the alternatives are not suitable. B. Azure Key Vault is used by applications to securely retrieve stored secrets, API keys, and certificates, but it is not an identity provider that issues user authentication tokens. C. Azure Storage stores data objects and files. It does not authenticate users or issue tokens. D. Microsoft Defender for Cloud monitors the security posture of the infrastructure. It does not act as an identity provider. Here's a useful exam tip. Whenever an application needs to authenticate users, manage single sign-on, SSO, or issue identity tokens, the backend service doing the work is Microsoft Entra ID. Let's continue with question number 118. This question takes us into high availability. Let's start with the scenario. You are evaluating the Service Level Agreement, SLA, for a new database service in Azure. The document guarantees that the service will be operational and reachable for 99.9% of a given month. Which cloud computing concept does this percentage represent? Let's compare the available options. Option A is high availability. Option B is scalability. Option C is elasticity. Option D is predictability. Go with option A, high availability. Let's look at the reasoning. High availability is the concept of a system remaining operational and accessible for a high percentage of time, often expressed as nines, for example, 99.9% or 99.99%. The SLA financially backs this availability guarantee. The other choices do not work because B. Scalability is the ability to handle increased demand by adding resources, not the measurement of uptime. C. Elasticity is the ability to scale resources dynamically and automatically based on load, independent of uptime guarantees. D. Predictability refers to consistent performance and cost forecasting rather than a strict mathematical uptime percentage. Exam tip. SLAs are Microsoft's financial commitment to high availability. If the availability drops below the SLA percentage, for example, 99.9%, you are entitled to service credits. Next up is question number 119. Here's what is happening. Your organization has established a strict compliance rule that all storage accounts must be encrypted with customer-managed keys. You want to enforce this rule using an Azure policy definition. At which of the following scopes can you assign this Azure policy definition to enforce compliance? Here are the options. Choice A. A resource group. Choice B. An Azure resource lock. Choice C. A Microsoft Entra security group. Choice D. A container app image. In this case, choose option A. A resource group. The main reason is Azure policy evaluates and enforces compliance on Azure resources. Policies can be assigned at various scopes within the Azure Resource Manager hierarchy, management groups, subscriptions, and resource groups. Let's quickly check the incorrect choices. B. A resource lock prevents deletion or modification. It is a discrete tool, not a hierarchical scope to which you assign a policy. C. Microsoft Entra security groups are used to assign RBAC permissions to users. Azure policy applies to infrastructure scopes, not identity groups. D. A container app image is an application artifact, not an Azure management scope that can receive a policy assignment. A helpful shortcut is this. Azure policy assignments inherit downward. If assigned to a resource group, the policy applies to all existing and future resources within that specific group. Let's work through question number 120. Here's the situation to consider. A DevOps team uses a variety of operating systems, including Windows, macOS, and Linux, and wants to standardize their Azure administration tools. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. The first statement says, The Azure Command Line Interface, CLI, can be installed and executed natively on a Linux operating system. The second statement says, Azure PowerShell CMDlets can be installed and executed natively on a macOS operating system. The third statement says, you can execute both Azure CLI commands and Azure PowerShell CMDlets directly from the Azure Cloud Shell in your web browser. Statement 1 should be marked yes. The Azure CLI is written in Python and is fully supported on Linux. Statement 2 should be marked yes. Azure PowerShell runs on PowerShell Core, which is natively supported on macOS. Statement 3 should be marked yes. Cloud Shell provides environments for both Bash, with the CLI, and PowerShell, accessible entirely within a browser. Keep this point in mind for the exam. You are not locked into Windows to manage Azure. Both the CLI and PowerShell are cross-platform, Windows, Linux, macOS. Here comes question number 121. Here's the scenario. Your organization is moving its legacy file servers to the cloud. You need to create a centralized file share in Azure that can be mounted as a standard mapped network drive using the SMB protocol on several on-premises Windows 10 workstations. Which Azure service should you implement? The choices are Option A, Azure Files. Option B, Azure Blob Storage. Option C, Azure SQL Database. Option D, Azure Data Lake Storage. The right response is option A, Azure Files. Here's why. Azure Files provides fully managed file shares in the cloud that are accessible via the industry standard Server Message Block (SMB) protocol. This allows on-premises Windows, Linux, and macOS machines to mount the shares directly as mapped network drives. Now let's rule out the other options. B. Azure Blob Storage is an object storage solution designed for massive amounts of unstructured data accessed via REST APIs, not for mounting via SMB as a standard network drive. C. Azure SQL Database is a relational database for structured querying, completely unrelated to file shares. D. Azure Data Lake Storage is optimized for big data analytics and Hadoop workloads, not for replacing general-purpose Office file servers. Whenever a scenario asks for mapped network drives or SMB protocol support in the cloud, the answer is Azure Files. Question number 122 brings in a useful concept. Let's focus on the following scenario. An IT administrator is exploring tools to optimize their Azure environment proactively. Which task can you perform by using Azure Advisor? Focus on what separates these choices. Now examine choice A, review recommendations to improve the security posture of your Azure subscriptions. Now examine choice B, estimate the monthly cost of deploying a new architecture before provisioning it. Now examine choice C, assess and migrate on-premises VMware virtual machines to Azure. Now examine choice D, synchronize on-premises Active Directory users with Microsoft Entra ID. Go with option A, review recommendations to improve the security posture of your Azure subscriptions. This is the best choice because Azure Advisor analyzes your deployed resources and provides best practice recommendations. It integrates directly with Microsoft Defender for Cloud to display actionable security recommendations on its dashboard. B. Estimating costs before provisioning is done using the Azure Pricing Calculator, not Advisor. Advisor helps optimize the costs of resources that are already deployed. C. Assessing and migrating on-premises workloads is performed using Azure Migrate. D. Synchronizing identities is performed using Microsoft Entra Connect. The main takeaway is Azure Advisor provides recommendations across 5 pillars: cost, security, reliability, operational excellence, and performance. It only works on resources you have already deployed. Question number 123. Let's go. Next, let's move into network connectivity. A company needs to connect its on-premises network to an Azure virtual network. Which two Azure services can provide connectivity between the on-premises network and the Azure virtual network? Each correct answer presents a complete connectivity option. You need to identify two correct options. Option A, Azure DNS. Option B, Azure VPN Gateway. Option C, Azure Express Route. Option D, Azure Traffic Manager. The correct answers are Option B, Azure VPN Gateway, and Option C, Azure Express Route. This works because Azure VPN Gateway provides encrypted connectivity over the public internet, while Azure Express Route provides a private dedicated connection through a connectivity provider. Both connect on-premises networks to Azure virtual networks. The remaining options can be eliminated because A. Azure DNS resolves domain names but does not create network connectivity. D. Azure Traffic Manager is a DNS-based traffic distribution service and does not connect an on-premises network to a virtual network. Here's a useful exam tip. Use VPN Gateway for encrypted connections over the Internet and ExpressRoute for private dedicated connectivity. Let's continue with question number 124. First, let's review the situation. A company adopts a new cloud-based software solution. Select the appropriate phrase to complete the sentence. Statement 1. When utilizing a software as a service, SaaS, application in the cloud, the customer is typically responsible for the blank. Choose between 1. Configuring the SaaS solution, managing the physical hosts, patching the operating system, or provisioning network switches. For Statement 1, choose configuring the SaaS solution. The provider manages the infrastructure and operating system, while the customer manages application settings, identities, and data. Exam tip. SaaS transfers the most infrastructure management responsibility to the cloud provider. Let's focus on question number 125. The key situation is this. A company wants a separate billing and access management boundary for a new business unit in Azure. Which Azure organizational component should the company create? Watch the differences between these options. Option A. An Azure subscription. Option B. A resource group. Option C. A management group. Option D. An Azure region. The answer here is Option A. An Azure subscription. An Azure subscription is a billing and access management boundary. It can separate costs, quotas, and permissions for a business unit or workload. Here's why the alternatives are not suitable. B. A resource group organizes related resources within a subscription. C. A management group organizes multiple subscriptions for governance. D. An Azure region is a geographic area containing Azure data centers. A helpful shortcut is this. Management groups contain subscriptions, subscriptions contain resource groups contain resources. Let's take a look at question number 126. This is a medium-level challenge. Take a moment to review this scenario. A company is reviewing the relationship between Azure subscriptions and Microsoft Entra tenants. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Now check statement 1. An Azure subscription is associated with one Microsoft Entra tenant at a time. Now check statement 2. One Microsoft Entra tenant can be associated with multiple Azure subscriptions. Now check statement 3. Cancelling an Azure subscription automatically deletes its associated Microsoft Entra tenant. The answer here is yes. A subscription trusts one Microsoft Entra tenant for authentication at any given time. The answer here is yes. Multiple subscriptions can use the same Microsoft Entra tenant. The answer here is no. The tenant is an independent directory and is not automatically removed when a subscription is cancelled. Keep this point in mind for the exam. A subscription has one tenant association at a time, but a tenant can support many subscriptions. Question number 127. An application runs on an Azure virtual machine. Internet users must be able to reach the application. Solution: you assign a public IP address to the virtual machine and configure the required network access rules. Does this meet the goal? Review the options. Choice A, yes. Choice B, no. The best choice is option A, yes. Let's look at the reasoning. A public IP provides an internet routable endpoint, and the network access rules can permit the application traffic. Together, these elements enable inbound internet connectivity to the virtual machine. The other choices do not work because B, the solution includes both a public endpoint and permission for the required traffic, so rejecting it is incorrect. A public endpoint enables internet access. A private endpoint keeps access on private networks. Now for question number 128. Consider this situation. A company plans to move on-premises servers and applications to Azure. Select the appropriate phrase to complete the sentence. The first one reads, Azure Migrate is primarily designed to provide the blank for on-premises workloads moving to Azure. Pick from 1. Assessment and migration, disaster recovery replication, identity management, or application performance monitoring. The first statement uses assessment and migration. Azure Migrate provides a centralized service for discovering, assessing, and migrating on-premises workloads to Azure. The main takeaway is Azure Migrate supports migration planning and execution. Azure Data Box is used to move large amounts of data physically. Question number 129. We are moving on to Azure Service Health. Scenario: your organization hosts critical web applications in the Azure East US region. You need to be proactively aware of any upcoming physical infrastructure maintenance that Microsoft has scheduled, which might cause brief downtime for your deployed virtual machines. Which Azure service should you use to view a personalized list of these planned maintenance events? Options. Option A, Azure Service Health. Option B, Azure Advisor. Option C, Azure Monitor. Option D, Microsoft Defender for Cloud. In this case, choose option A, Azure Service Health. The main reason is Azure Service Health provides a personalized view of the health of the Azure services and regions you are actively using. It alerts you to ongoing service issues, upcoming planned maintenance, and relevant health advisories that specifically impact your subscriptions. Let's quickly check the incorrect choices. B. Azure Advisor provides best practice recommendations for cost, security, reliability, and performance, not real-time maintenance tracking. C. Azure Monitor collects metrics and logs from your own applications and infrastructure. D. Microsoft Defender for Cloud assesses security posture and compliance. Here's a useful exam tip. Use Azure Service Health to track planned maintenance, ongoing regional outages, and health advisories that specifically affect your deployed resources. Now let's examine question number 130. Let's start with the scenario. A cloud architect is planning a resilient Azure deployment. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Statement 1. Deploying virtual machines across Azure availability zones protects workloads against a localized data center failure. Statement 2. Deploying virtual machines across Azure availability zones protects workloads against a full Azure region failure. Statement 3. Availability zones are separate physical locations within a single Azure region. The first statement is yes. Each zone has independent power, cooling, and networking, so a failure in one zone need not affect another. The second statement is no. Availability zones are contained within one region and do not by themselves protect against a region-wide outage. The third statement is yes. Zones are physically separate locations inside the same Azure region. Exam tip. Availability zones protect against failures within a region. Region pairs and multi-region designs address regional failures. Let's take a look at question number 131. Here's the situation to consider. An administrator wants to manage Azure resources from Windows, macOS, or Linux by using a command line tool. Solution: use Azure CLI. Does this meet the goal? Here are the possible answers. Choice A, yes. Choice B, no. The right response is option A, yes. Here's why. Azure CLI is a cross-platform command line tool for creating and managing Azure resources from Windows, macOS, Linux, and Azure Cloud Shell. Now let's rule out the other options. B. Azure CLI is specifically designed for cross-platform command line management, so this option is incorrect. A helpful shortcut is this. Azure CLI uses as commands. Azure PowerShell uses PowerShell cmdlets with the as module. Now let's examine question number 132. Let's start with the scenario. Your organization mandates that a new cloud application must be built using only Platform as a Service (PaaS) offerings. Solution: you provision an Azure App Service web app and an Azure storage account. Does this meet the goal? Let's compare the available options. Option A is yes. Option B is no. Go with option A, yes. This is the best choice because Azure App Service and Azure Storage are platform services. Microsoft manages their underlying physical infrastructure and operating systems, so the solution satisfies the pass-only requirement. B. Rejecting the solution is incorrect because both Azure App Service and Azure Storage are examples of PaaS services in Microsoft guidance. Keep this point in mind for the exam. PaaS services let you use application and data platforms without managing the underlying virtual machines or operating systems. Next, question number 133. The focus now shifts to Azure cost management. A company is learning how Azure pricing and cost management tools work. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Now check statement 1. In a consumption-based cloud model, charges are based on the resources that are used. Now check statement 2. The Azure pricing calculator can estimate the expected cost of a planned Azure solution before deployment. Now check statement 3. Applying a tag to an Azure resource automatically reduces the resource price. For statement 1, choose yes. Consumption pricing charges for measured usage rather than requiring all capacity to be purchased in advance. For statement 2, choose yes. The pricing calculator estimates costs from selected services, configurations, and expected usage. For statement 3, choose no. Tags organize and allocate costs but do not change service prices by themselves. Use the pricing calculator before deployment and cost management after deployment to analyze and control spending. Next up is question number 134. An organization is reviewing the Zero Trust security model for Azure. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Statement 1. The Zero Trust model follows the principle of assuming that a breach can occur. Statement 2. Zero Trust grants broad permanent access after a user signs in from a trusted network. Statement 3. Zero Trust uses explicit verification and least privilege access. The answer here is yes. Assume breach is one of the core Zero Trust principles. The answer here is no. Zero Trust continuously evaluates access rather than trusting a network location or granting unnecessary standing access. The answer here is yes. Verify explicitly and use least privilege are core Zero Trust principles. The main takeaway is remember the 3 Zero Trust principles: verify explicitly, use least privilege, and assume breach. See how you handle question number 135. Next, let's move into Azure PowerShell. Look for the most important clue in this scenario. An administrator prefers PowerShell cmdlets for creating and managing Azure resources. Solution: use Azure PowerShell with the AZ module. Does this meet the goal? Use the details in the question to eliminate options. Consider option A, yes. Consider option B, no. The answer here is option A, yes. This works because Azure PowerShell provides PowerShell cmdlets in the AZ module for managing Azure resources from a PowerShell environment. The remaining options can be eliminated because B, Azure PowerShell is the Azure management tool designed for PowerShell users, so this option is incorrect. Here's a useful exam tip. Azure PowerShell uses verb as noun cmdlets, while Azure CLI uses AZ commands. Let's work through question number 136. First, let's review the situation. An operations team is evaluating Azure monitoring capabilities. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. The first statement says, Azure Monitor collects and analyzes telemetry from Azure resources and applications. The second statement says, Log Analytics is used to query and analyze log data collected by Azure Monitor. The third statement says, Azure Monitor alerts can notify users or trigger automated actions when defined conditions are met. For statement 1, choose yes. Azure Monitor is the central platform for metrics, logs, traces, and related monitoring data. For statement 2, choose yes. Log Analytics provides an interface and query capability for Azure Monitor logs. For statement 3, choose yes. Alert rules evaluate monitoring data and can use action groups for notifications or automation. Exam tip. Azure Monitor collects data, log analytics queries logs, and alerts initiate notifications or actions. Let's continue with question number 137. This question takes us into hybrid cloud. Take a moment to review this scenario. A company is comparing public, private, and hybrid cloud deployment models. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. The first statement says, implementing a hybrid cloud strategy requires an organization to retain private infrastructure, such as on-premises resources or a private cloud. The second statement says, a hybrid cloud can connect on-premises resources with resources in a public cloud. The third statement says, resources in a public cloud are exclusively intended for users outside the organization. Statement 1 should be marked yes. Hybrid cloud combines public cloud with private infrastructure. Statement 2 should be marked yes. Integration between private infrastructure and a public cloud is the defining characteristic of a hybrid model. Statement 3 should be marked no. Organizations commonly use public cloud resources for their own employees, applications, and customers. A helpful shortcut is this. Hybrid cloud means integrated private and public cloud environments. Question number 138. Needs a little extra thought. Before choosing, identify the key constraint. An administrator wants to use Azure CLI without installing it on a local computer. Solution: open Azure Cloud Shell in a browser and select Bash. Does this meet the goal? Compare each option with the requirement. Consider option A yes. Consider option B no. The right response is option A yes. Azure Cloud Shell includes Azure CLI and provides a browser-based Bash environment, so Azure CLI commands can be run without a local installation. Here's why the alternatives are not suitable. B. Cloud Shell includes Azure CLI, so a local Azure CLI installation is not required for this solution. Keep this point in mind for the exam. Azure Cloud Shell provides both Bash with Azure CLI and PowerShell with Azure PowerShell. Let's continue with question number 139. We are moving on to pricing calculator. Let's start with the scenario. A company wants to estimate the monthly cost of an Azure solution before creating any resources. Select the appropriate tool to complete the sentence. For the first statement, the Azure tool used to estimate the cost of a planned solution before deployment is the blank. Your choices are 1. Azure Pricing Calculator, Azure Monitor, Azure Service Health, or Azure Policy. The answer for statement 1 is Azure Pricing Calculator. The Azure Pricing Calculator estimates costs from selected services, configurations, regions, and expected usage. Use the pricing calculator to estimate planned costs and Azure Cost Management to analyze actual spending. See how you handle question number 140. Before choosing, identify the key constraint. An Azure administrator wants to protect resources from accidental changes or deletion. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Now check statement 1, a delete lock prevents an Azure resource from being deleted but still permits authorized modifications. Now check statement 2. A read-only lock prevents authorized users from modifying or deleting the locked resource. Now check statement 3. A lock applied to a resource group is inherited by resources in that resource group. The first statement is yes. A delete lock blocks deletion while allowing other permitted control plane changes. The second statement is yes. A read-only lock permits read operations but blocks control plane changes and deletion. The third statement is yes. Management locks inherit from parent scopes such as subscriptions and resource groups. The main takeaway is delete locks allow modification but block deletion. Read-only locks block both modification and deletion. Let's work through question number 141. Take a moment to review this scenario. A company is learning the relationship between Azure regions, data centers, and availability zones. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Statement 1. An Azure region is a geographic area that contains one or more data centers. Statement 2. Availability zones are separate physical locations within an Azure region. Statement 3. An Azure region and an availability zone are the same type of architectural component. The first statement is yes. Azure regions are geographic deployment areas made up of one or more data centers. The second statement is yes. Availability zones provide physically separate locations inside a region. The third statement is no, a region is the broader geographic area, while a zone is a separate location within a supported region. Here's a useful exam tip. A region is a geographic area, an availability zone is a separate physical location inside a region. Let's take a look at question number 142. Next, let's move into resource groups. Here's the situation to consider. You are preparing to manage permissions using Azure Role-Based Access Control, RBAC, for a collection of Azure virtual machines. Select the appropriate phrase to complete the sentence. Now look at statement 1. To easily assign permissions to multiple Azure virtual machines at once using inheritance, you should deploy the virtual machines the blank. For this one, the options are 1. To the same resource group, into the same availability set, in the same Azure region, or using the same deployment template. Statement 1 should be completed with to the same resource group. An RBAC assignment at resource group scope is inherited by the resources in that group. Exam tip. Azure RBAC assignments inherit from management groups to subscriptions, resource groups, and resources. Question number 143. Scenario. A startup is organizing Azure resources and governance scopes. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Now check statement 1. An Azure management group can contain Azure subscriptions. Now check statement 2. An Azure subscription can contain resource groups. Now check statement 3. An Azure resource group can contain management groups. The answer here is yes. Management groups provide a governance scope above subscriptions. The answer here is yes. Resource groups are logical containers created within a subscription. The answer here is no. Management groups sit above subscriptions and cannot be nested inside resource groups. A helpful shortcut is this. Remember the hierarchy: management groups leads to subscriptions, leads to resource groups, leads to resources. Take a careful look at question number 144. The difficulty level here is easy. Pay close attention to what the scenario really requires. You need to deploy a new Azure virtual machine while traveling. You only have access to a tablet running the Android operating system. Solution: you open a web browser on the tablet, sign into the Azure portal, and provision the virtual machine. Does this meet the goal? See which choices you can rule out. Next, option A, yes. Next, option B, no. The best choice is option A, yes. Let's look at the reasoning. The Azure portal is a web-based management console that is accessible from any modern web browser, including mobile browsers on Android devices. It can be used to deploy and manage Azure resources. The other choices do not work because B. Denying this is incorrect because the portal is strictly web-based and OS agnostic. Keep this point in mind for the exam. For mobile management without a browser, you can also use the official Azure mobile app available for iOS and Android. Now let's examine question number 145. First, let's review the situation. Your organization mandates that a new cloud application must be built using only Platform as a Service (PaaS) offerings. Solution: you provision Azure virtual machines, Azure SQL databases, and an Azure storage account. Does this meet the goal? Now let's review the options. Option A is yes. Option B is no. In this case, choose option B, no. The main reason is the scenario dictates that the architecture must use only Platform as a Service (PaaS). Azure virtual machines provide raw compute infrastructure and are categorized as Infrastructure as a Service (IaaS). Let's quickly check the incorrect choices. A. Approving this architecture violates the requirement as it introduces IaaS components, virtual machines. IaaS provides you with an operating system you must patch and manage. PaaS abstracts the OS away, letting you focus only on the application code or data. Let's continue with question number 146. We are moving on to public cloud. Take a moment to review this scenario. A business is evaluating the shift from on-premises infrastructure to cloud services. Select the appropriate phrase to complete the sentence. The first one reads, when an organization transitions to hosting its entire infrastructure the blank, it no longer needs to maintain its own physical data center. Choose between 1. In the public cloud, in a private cloud, on a Hyper-V cluster, or in an on-premises environment. For statement 1, choose in the public cloud. The public cloud provider owns and operates the physical data centers and infrastructure. The main takeaway is in a public cloud, the provider owns the infrastructure. In a private cloud, infrastructure is dedicated to one organization. Let's work through question number 147. First, let's review the situation. A retail company is migrating its e-commerce website to Azure App Service. Select the appropriate phrase to complete the sentence. For the first statement, when migrating a public-facing workload to the cloud, the organization must budget for the blank. Pick from 1. Ongoing monthly consumption costs, purchasing physical servers in advance, paying a flat fee to transfer data into Azure, or establishing a dedicated VPN gateway. The first statement uses ongoing monthly consumption costs. Cloud services commonly use consumption-based billing, so ongoing usage creates recurring operating costs. Here's a useful exam tip. Consumption-based pricing means paying for the services and capacity used over time. Question number 148. Needs a little extra thought. Look for the most important clue in this scenario. Your organization mandates that a new cloud application must be built using only Platform as a Service (PaaS) offerings. Solution: you provision an Azure App Service web app and an Azure SQL database. Does this meet the goal? Compare each option with the requirement. Next, option A, yes. Next, option B, no. Go with option A, yes. Here's why. Azure App Service is a fully managed platform as a service (PaaS) offering for web hosting. Azure SQL Database is a fully managed PaaS database offering. This solution perfectly meets the requirement to use only PaaS. Now let's rule out the other options. B. Denying this solution is incorrect because neither App Service nor Azure SQL Database requires you to manage the underlying infrastructure or OS. Exam tip. PaaS solutions significantly reduce administrative overhead compared to IaaS virtual machines. Let's take a look at question number 149. Let's start with the scenario. A company wants a unified view of data governance across on-premises, multi-cloud, and software-as-a-service data sources. Select the appropriate service to complete the sentence. Statement 1. A company should use the blank to discover, classify, and govern data across its data estate. For this one, the options are 1. Microsoft Purview, Azure Policy, Microsoft Entra ID, or Microsoft Defender for Cloud. The answer for statement 1 is Microsoft Purview. Microsoft Purview provides data discovery, classification, cataloging, and governance capabilities across a data estate. A helpful shortcut is this. Use Microsoft Purview for data governance. Use Azure Policy for governance rules applied to Azure resources. Now let's examine question number 150. Here's the situation to consider. An IT manager is reviewing cloud deployment models. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. Statement 1. An organization can scale a private cloud by directly installing its own physical hardware inside an Azure data center. Statement 2. Establishing a hybrid cloud architecture requires an organization to integrate private infrastructure with a public cloud. Statement 3. By definition, a private cloud must be completely disconnected from the public internet. Statement 1 should be marked no. Customers do not install their own physical hardware inside Microsoft-operated Azure data centers. Statement 2 should be marked yes. Hybrid cloud combines and integrates private infrastructure with public cloud services. Statement 3 should be marked no. A private cloud is dedicated to one organization but can still have controlled internet connectivity. Keep this point in mind for the exam. Private describes tenancy and control. Hybrid describes integration between private and public environments. Here's an important one. Question number 151. The focus now shifts to storage redundancy. This situation sets up the main requirement. A developer is comparing Azure storage redundancy options. For each statement, select yes if the statement is true. Otherwise, select no. The first statement says, locally redundant storage, LRS, keeps multiple copies of data within a single Azure region. The second statement says, zone redundant storage, ZRS, replicates data across availability zones in the primary region. The third statement says, georedundant storage, GRS, keeps all copies of data only in the primary region. For statement 1, choose yes. LRS maintains redundant copies in the selected primary region. For statement 2, choose yes. ZRS synchronously spreads copies across separate zones in the primary region. For statement 3, choose no. GRS also replicates data asynchronously to a secondary Azure region. LRS is local, ZRS is zonal, GRS is geographic, and GZRS combines zone and geographic redundancy. You have completed part 4 of the AZ-900 practice question series. Continue your preparation by opening the complete playlist and watching the remaining parts in sequence. Please like this video, subscribe to Tech with Kaushik, and enable notifications for more cloud certification exam preparation content. Share your score, questions, or feedback in the comments. Thank you for watching. See you in the next part.